sponsored by JavaScript. Get my headphones in. Right, is anybody here? Let's have a look. Two watching. Let's go a bit longer. What time is it? 3:06. Thanks, man. Who else is around? Why am I typing? I can speak. Who else is watching the stream? According to YouTube, I've only got two, which would be me and yourself. I am there. Okay, so that's three of us in total. Bottle of water. There were. Let me scroll up and have a look in Discord. I think there were 13 people expressed interest. Before this always happens, people just say they can rock up and they don't bother. But as long as I've got at least one person who's getting some benefit, and I'll carry on. Let's have a look. See who else might be expected. 15. How do I see the votes? We'll give it a little bit longer. I think what we'll do as well is we'll put stuff in Discord in terms of the code that we're going to go through. In a few minutes when we do start, I'll let you two drive in terms of what you want to do, because I've previously said, okay, let's do a recap of what I did last week. But if you guys are already beyond that, we can do whatever will help you guys. Because I'm gonna give as much input to those who rock up more so than those that, I'm going to give more input and more emphasis on those that actually bother to turn up when they say they're going to, than those that can't be bothered. So anyway, we'll give it a little bit longer. Yeah, my stream got taken down by YouTube for live streaming a sporting event on BBC. Wasn't the best idea, I suppose. Right, okay, yes, I don't know if you all saw that. Have you all got an IDE installed, Integrated Development Environment? Have you all got Rider or Visual Studio installed? Because if you want to follow along, and that's the best way you're going to learn, rather than just watching me and listen to me waffle on, you're going to learn more if you actually do as we go along, as you do stuff as you're going along. And then any problems that you can have we can address while I'm here, and we can have a chat. Be useful. If you do have problems, take a screenshot and paste it into the Discord session, and I can see what the problem is and hopefully resolve it. And what I'll probably ask, actually, seems you two, the guys that's here at the moment, how much experience do either of you two have in C#? Are you completely fresh to C#? Are you completely fresh to programming? Do you know what an IDE is? Have you used Visual Studio before? Have you used Rider before? That kind of thing. Because that'll help me know where to steer this. And also, and when we're going on and things are moving and we're looking at some code, if you need me to slow down or speed up, just tell me. I won't be offended. This is about you're watching. In fact, I'm vibe coding it anyway using Claude. Okay, fair enough. But you would learn a lot better if you installed the IDE. And I'd be quite happy to wait for you to do that, since I'm waiting for the other people anyway. It'll only take you maybe 5 minutes or so. But it's up to you if you just want to watch. Because last week, for example, when we did this, to me it feels easy because I've obviously been doing it for a number of years. But you look at some of the people that are new to it, and maybe I've not made something as obvious as I should have done because they're beginners to it. And there's a bit going, oh, what did so-and-so mean? Again, why didn't this bit work? And they might have missed a keyword out, or they might have missed a tick box when they set up the project, that kind of thing. So you will learn more if you're doing as we go along. But if you choose not to, that's fine too. Last week we experimented with actually having people's voices in via the Discord chat. It got a little bit confusing, to be honest with you, and there was some weird reverb echo thing, even though I've got my headphones in, so that it doesn't like do the reverb through that. But for whatever reason, when we've got people's voices in, when we've got other people's voices in, it caused some weird issues. I think that's to do with Discord setup, but I don't know. Anyway, I think it gets a bit distracting with a lot of other people's voices in as well. So I think the typing is probably the best for now. We'll see how it goes anyway. And I would suggest segmentation fault. I think I spoke to you a bit before. Vibe coding is not the best way to learn coding. It's the best way to get fast results, but it's not the best way to learn something. I think I've mentioned that a few times on this channel before, but I can't remember who to. You've been working on Visual Studio for a few weeks. I've been working through C# Player's Guide. I'm about 100 pages in, so I've done most of the problem. This might be completely fresh to programming in the last few weeks, but I am obsessive personality and have at least 100 to 200 hours. I know it's a lot of time for me, but for the little amount of time. Came out from working Unity in addition to the C# Player's Guide. I've been doing the Junior Programming Unity tutorials. Okay, so perhaps I don't need to go into like some of the recap that I was going to do. I'm still waiting to see if any more people rock up. I think that might be it. What have we got in there now? It says 2 watching. Let me just refresh that. Tutorials. Okay, so all right, we're nearly 15 minutes in. I know the bug has rocked up. So, yeah, as I said, I'm quite happy to adhere to what people want to do that have actually bothered to turn up. It annoys me when people say they're going to turn up. Maybe I should put a maybe channel, a maybe option next time. I've had a lot of yeses this week, but, 2 people turn up. I do find that a little frustrating. Anyway, all right, so let's make a start. So, segmentation fault. I don't know how much you've done in terms of coding in general. Boomtrout looks like he's done a little bit more than I was thinking that some of the other beginners last week had done. If you've not done much yourself, I could do a little bit of a recap to what we did, talk a little bit about the IDE and a little bit about some basics of C#. But I'll see what you were about to say there. But we're just about ready to start. In fact, well, you know what I'll probably do? I'll run through what we did. The problem is already a programming experience. I can learn by documentation. Probably is really pressure in time, and to understand in detail, it's going to be really hard to do in a short time. So why are you limited in time, pressured in time? Because, did you have a project that you're currently working on segmentation for? Is that right? Especially when you keep jumping from framework to framework and language to language. Yeah, you need to pick one and stick with it, in my opinion. Ravel to Django. Oh, that's Python. I don't really know much. I've done a bit of Python in the past. Not much of it. Java. Yeah, I think I've talked to you about Java before. 5 projects plus exams. All right. So I think what I'll do is start. I'll go through what I did last week, just so that they're on the same page, and then we'll sort of take it from there. But I'll go through it fairly quickly. It seems segmentation fault's more of a vibe coder. And yourself, Boomtrout, interesting name. You've probably already done most of this. No, it's Unis, not me. Okay. All right. So I'm assuming you can all see that there. So we're going to start a new console app, and we'll add a library to it. We'll have a little talk about NuGet. You may or may not have used that before. For me, I would only use JS. I would use JS only since I'm familiar with it. Yes. No, I'm not a vibe coder. All right, okay. Vibe coding my way. All right, you did say. All right. Okay, so we're going to start a new solution. I'll go through this fairly quick. Console app 2, whatever. Not really that bothered. Make sure it's a console. I make sure it's a console type, project type. That was a mistake somebody made last week. And I'm not going to use top level statements in the moment because I don't want to confuse people with that. And now I've got me, when it finishes, a very simple program there. Now, where the Visual Studio and Rider work with C# projects is they all get put under one roof. So you have multiple projects all in the same roof. And as I demonstrated last week, which I'm going to demonstrate again now, if I can find where I did it, just bear with me. And I'm going to show this in Visual Studio, but mainly because that's what I tend to use. I'm fairly new to Rider. I've used Visual Studio for many years, but I'm using Rider for the purposes of what we're talking about today, simply because it is cross-platform, so people on Mac and Windows can use it. But I tend to use Visual Studio. So here is a more significant project. Here's when I created the earlier type thing, and all these are different projects of different types. And some of them are linked to each other in terms of they can use code from each other, and some of them are not. But they're part of what's called the same solution in Visual Studio and Rider terms, I guess, but it's a Microsoft terminology. And the solution comprises of one or more projects. And you link these together so that you can share code. And in this particular project, which we're doing here, which has got a front end and a back end component to it, there are libraries for the front end, there are libraries for the back end, and the back end uses a REST API. I'm assuming you know what one of those is, and the front end talk to that. So effectively, I built this solution. It builds all the back end components and all the front end components all under one place. This is the reason why I've gone with Rider and Visual Studio rather than VS Code, because VS Code tends to deal with one project at a time. Although you can change that, but it's more of a faff. So that's why I've gone this route. So coming back to Rider here, and when I first started looking at this last week, and I was doing this little tutorial thing here, somebody says, "Can you explain what these things are in here?" The only other thing you need to worry about, at the moment anyway, is dependencies. And this basically lists all your dependencies. If you've come from a C++ world or a C world, all of those things are a lot harder to manage and a lot harder to build. I've talked a lot in depth on the other channel about that, so it's probably a little bit too far out of scope for now. But C# and .NET, in the same way that Java does, allows you to manage these very nicely. And what you can do, if you want to do a particular thing, you can use NuGet. And NuGet is the package manager that Rider and Visual Studio uses. So I can look at my NuGet packages. And I think of an example. I'll use the one that we used last week, which we wanted something that talked to Excel, the Microsoft product. I can't remember which one we did. It doesn't matter which one. I can now install this. If I remember where the button is on this particular one, I'm used to it from Visual Studio. There we go. Right, so I'm now installing that, and I've now got access to everything that this library provides. And I can see when I look at my packages that it's listed there. And all of these, I'm sorry, what was that? Any explanation about that? For me, honestly, I'm just not into C#, how you use program concepts and what other new program concepts it introduces in the table. Since language is just syntax anyways, remember that details here. Any explanation about dependencies? Yes, sure, okay, right. So dependency, I'll tell you what, before we get into that, let's create a dependency. Let's create a project dependency rather than a package. And that will make things a little bit more transparent. So what I'm going to do now is, so we've got a basic program there. We've got, I don't know if I assume you know what namespaces are. If not, I'll come back to that. We've got a basic project there. We've got some very simple code with a main, which is the entry point to the program, and we're just in a console.writeline. This is your typical hello world. Doesn't do very much in here at the moment. But let's assume we wanted to create a class library, and that's a DLL, Dynamic Link Library. The analogy on the Mac world is a shared object, or a Dynalink, Dynalib, sorry. So let's create a new project. I'm creating a new project. I'm going to make sure this is called a class library. And I had some sample code that I was going to remind me how what I did last week. Just bear with me. I'm digging it out on the other monitor. All right, we'll call it Bitman's library. And I'm going to make sure it says class library. That was a mistake somebody made last week. And now I have Bitman's lib and this console app thing here. Let's say that Bitman's lib has got some useful code in it, right? Let's just put something in there. I'll grab the example from last week. Right, so I've just got something trivial there just so I can demonstrate a purpose. Now let's say I want to call this from this other class library. So as you've mentioned, these are going to be namespace like code. Sure, I should finish my point before I read that. These are going to be, what we're looking on the screen now, these are going to be in different DLLs. Now interestingly, if you come from a C++ or a C world, you would expect the console app to also be in you would expect the console app to be in an executable file if you're Windows based. Turns out they all run in a DLL. And that's analogous to the fact that they all have a runtime, the .NET runtime. So your code all lives in DLL, and the .NET runtime will... Oh no, tell a lie. There is an executable type. There is an executable. Ignore that. Ignore that. In fact, let's verify that. I'm going to verify that by running it shortly. But generally, most things will be in a DLL. If I run this, it does actually create an exit time. Ignore that last point there. Right, so and you can look, if you look at the right click the properties, I've got console application. That will generate an exit. This one will be a DLL. In fact, let's talk a little bit about the project files that this generates, because you're asking related things to that. So I'm going to build that, and I'm going to make a reference to it, and I'm going to make the console app call the new library. So I've built that now. Let's have a look at what actually files that's produced. Open in Explorer. So there's my library. There's a DLL. And if I go back to my console app, I've got an exe. Hopefully. Yes, yeah. Interesting, there's a DLL as well. Not entirely sure why. I mean, to be fair, you don't really need to worry about it. It just takes care of it all for you. It's like if I was doing this in the C++ or the C world, you do need to, you obviously take a lot of care about what gets housed where. But other than when you set your project up, where you go and effectively that dictates what that is a class library or a console app or these other ones. Don't know what module is, to be honest. But that will dictate whether it's in a DLL or an executable. You don't really need to worry about it. But what you do need to worry about is what I'm about to show you about how to get to your different libraries from another one in the set, another project in the same solution. So let's say I wanted to call Can You See on there. Now, the way that I would do that, and this comes on to a little bit about namespaces. Namespaces, you said, namespaces on this, I'm using .NET Runtime Autolinks. Yeah, the .NET Runtime pulls them all together by you making references. It worries that it sorts all that out for you. It's really nice. So, namespaces basically allow me to have, in fact, let's show an example. Oh no, let's come back to this. I'll come back to namespaces. I'm jumping in myself here. Let's first of all call my new code. So I've got Bitman's lib. Interestingly, I don't know if you know what IntelliSense is. IntelliSense is the bit that allows it pushes you and says, oh, did you want to type so-and-so? And it makes it life really easy. But notice it's red. It's saying, oh, I don't know what Bitman's lib is. And let me just remember what I put in there, because I've got a memory I can save. In fact, I'm going to move that over there. I can do class 1. Right, and oh crap, it won't compile. Let me build that. Is it Control Shift B on this one? Let's see if it is. Yes, it is. Right, Bitman's lib does not exist in this current concept. Oh, why is that? 'Cause I've got Bitman's lib down here. I can put it in there, and it should be able to see it, right? No, it shouldn't, because what I need to do is tell it about my project package, and the way that I do that is by doing. Where is it on this one? I use the other IDE generally. Add reference, project reference. There we go. So now I'm going to add a reference from this project, Console App 2, to my other project in this solution, Batman's Lib. And now me doing, oh right, okay, I know what Batman is now, and I can run that. I can build that and I can run it. So if now run it, where's the output gone? Oh, it's launching still. There you go. You can see the output there. Don't want that thing. I'll get rid of that. So there was the first bit of login, and sorry, there was the first bit of login there, and then I'm calling that method in there. So effectively, you put you create class libraries, and then you put your code in them. You make sure that the code you put in them is public. I'll come back onto that if you're not aware of that, what that means. And then you can call that from wherever, from whatever has made a reference to it. Sorry, but you need to be explicit. So I'm using .NET Runtime Autolix. I'll come on to that. Now a little bit more on the namespaces. What I could do in here, oops. There's this other thing that I keep doing. Is common, because I'm used to the hotkeys in Visual Studio, because I've used it for 20 years. I keep expecting to behave the same. You know, you develop a muscle memory. Anyway, let's say that coming back to this bit of code here. I'm just going to copy it to save type in. Obviously, I've got the same function names in here. And it turns out they happen to be under a different class. But I can effectively completely replicate the entire... So I could have a class 1 in here. And it would be fine. Because it's in a different namespace. And as you said, namespace basically separates like code ranges, avoid naming conflicts. Yeah, you've put that well there. So that's namespaces, and it's the reason why I had to be very explicit here. Because if I just did this, that's now going to work, and it's going to call this one. But I don't want it to call this one. I want it to call my other one. I want the one that I created in my other library. So that's basically references. Now, if you wanted to look at that in a project, in fact, let's have a look at these files manually. You might not at this stage. You probably wouldn't need to go to this level, but just to show you how these sort of things are hooked up. I won't go into a lot of detail, but so back to our project. You've got this solution file, star.sln. Anonymous namespaces. I don't know. I've never seen anonymous namespaces. You mean anonymous functions? I've seen those, but I've not seen anonymous namespaces. What language is they in? Interesting. And while you're talking about that, I don't know what anonymous namespaces are. I've not heard of them. I don't know which language have you seen those in? I've heard of anonymous functions. Right, coming back to while you're thinking about that, so this is that solution file here, right? Console.app1.sln, and you can see that. Have I opened the wrong one? I've opened the wrong one. Hang on. That was from last week's. Move that over there. Oh, leave that there. And I'm going to use Notepad++ because otherwise, if I try and open the solution, it might try and parse it. So there we go. This is my solution file. This is effectively this Console App 2 equivalent. This is the file. It's in a sort of weird format. It doesn't seem to have a... I don't know what the name of this format is, but you get used to it because sometimes you do need to modify this. But you can see here that it links to all the individual console apps. I'll come back to. I'll have to come back to that one. Can we take that one? We'll take that one offline, so to speak, because I need to do a bit of research onto that. But I will definitely answer your question. But it's not doing it in this stream. It's not something I've ever used or heard of. Interesting. Anyway, so right, coming back to this. This is your project file. Sorry, this is a solution file. and these are the projects that are referenced with it. And then each one of those, for example, if I come back to here, if I get the right one, you can see my 2 projects. There's that library, and all of these are housed in a CS project file. And this tells it what version of .NET it's running and a few other parameters. And this, if this had any references itself, it would list those there as well. In fact, let's see that in action, because there should be one I just added for the console app 2 that I'm looking at. There you go. So there's a reference. So your references can either be project related, and we have one there, or they can be package related. And the packages are things that are usually deployed on the internet. Somebody's created a third party, somebody's created a tool, or Microsoft created a tool, sorry, not tool, wrong word, a library, a framework, some third party code for, in this case, doing Excel. And you manage those with NuGet, and you can pull them in from NuGet, and pretty much anything you could possibly want to do with existing C#. It's got a very, very big set of third party libraries that you can manage from NuGet. On all of them, you can get to just by doing that. Or if you're doing it in the way that I'm used to, if you were doing it in Visual Studio, where's my other Visual Studio window going? I can do managing NuGet. So this is obviously a more complicated one. So I do come back to this one occasionally because this is a more realistic example than that dummy one that I've been looking at. So now, for example, I could see. So these are all my projects under that solution, and I can see here which ones have got what. So, for example, ADTP app has got installed version 8.3.2 of that package there. And obviously these are all the other ones that are installed. So this is a non-trivial project, and as you can see, there's a lot of third-party libraries here, and this is one of the nice things about C#. These are nice and easy to pull in. They're not like when you're dealing with C++ and C, and you're having to manage all your dependencies manually and make sure they all build nicely. This stuff just kind of works. You occasionally have a few problems with it, with some incompatibilities, but generally it's much easier to deal with. I assume that makes all makes sense so far. Let's get rid of that. Right, what else was I going to do next? Well, let me just look at my notes again. Where's it gone? Oh, it's there. No, that's not the one I was looking for. That's it. Right, so I talked about dependencies, class library. Okay, moving. Right, okay, so do you guys know what public and private is about in terms of APIs and what it means with classes? Well, first of all, do you know what classes are? Do you all know what classes are? Do you know what... If I said what's the difference between a static function in a class and a member function, would you know what that meant? So, for example, here... in fact, let's move to a simple example. And we'll actually implement that. Let me grab that code from... Just grabbing this from the example. No, you would not. Okay, cool. Right, this is going to be useful for you then, bitch out. Can't get over that name. Right. So, well, as soon as you said no, I'm actually going to start simpler than that. Let's just start with... Take that out of there for now. Boom, boom, boom. So do member variables. Statics belong to the class. Yes, so do member variables though. Static basically means I think we're on the same page. It's just how you worded it was a little. I wasn't sure if you got that. So basically, static means there is static in a variable is different to static in a function, right? So let's make that distinction clear first of all. In fact, before I come on to that, let's have a look. Okay, so no, in fact, we'll do that now. So this is a static function, and what it means is that in object-oriented world, you associate behavior and state under what's called a class. So in this example here, the bit I've added here, I've added some state. I've got an age and a name that's associated with class 1. And what that means is I can create multiple instances of class 1. Let's call it something different actually. Person, whatever. Just because class 1's a bit of a shit name. Why is it moaned at me there? Maybe because of that. Oh, there we go. Right, now obviously I had to change it there as well. So what I've got when you create a class, you can associate state that says when I create one or more persons, they can all have their own variables associated with them. Now this is very different to C, where effectively you're just throwing pointers around. In C sharp, you have variables that are associated with person. So I can create two instances of person. One of them could be called Boomtrout, whose age is probably a lot less than that, and then the other one could be called Martin, whose age is 53. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I will say when I'm 73. But so that these are variables that are associated with instances of the class. And now let's say I wanted to create that class. I'm going to grab my copying in. I'm pressing the wrong key again. I'll never get over that hotkey difference. Right, let's call that Martin, like that. So now I've got an instance of Martin. And what that means, I can do something like this. And I can also do this. Whatever. I've got a typo there. Because I didn't do my copy and paste right. There we go. So now I've actually got two instances of two people, two persons, and each one gets its own copy of these variables. So Martin gets an age, an integer, and he gets a string, which is called Martin, and then I've got a variable called Trout. I can do trout.name, oops, equals trout, and that, bomb trout, boom trout, there you go. Right, so when you don't use static on a function, when you do use static on a function, you can't access these variables. This is just like a function that doesn't have access to any state that's associated with an individual instance of that person. And the way that I create an individual instance of that person is by using a new keyword and associating it with a variable like that. So I've got person Martin equal, and obviously I can call that what I want, but I create a new instance of this. So we create a new instance of this and it assigns these variables. We'll come on to constructors later because constructors allow you to change all that behavior. But we'll move on to that. At the moment, I've got two public variables, and I can get to those as you've seen here. But the important thing to remember, the important thing to say is that these member variables are associated for each instance of the object. So I'll create an instance of the object, and each one's got their own copy. Does that all make sense so far? But then when you call static's like saying, I can't access these variables. There's no associated state with the instances. Now, there is an exception to that, but I'll come on to that shortly. But I can't now go console.print. I can't do that. Let's grab that one, make it easier. Notice now, if I try and print the age, it doesn't like it. It's probably giving me some nice error somewhere. It'll say this is not static. Let's build it. I'll come back to static variables shortly. Right. What's this? I don't know. Bloody hotkey. I pressed the wrong hotkey there. I'm building this. It's going to fail. I just want to see what error it spits out of me. An object reference is required for a non-static field. Oh. So that's telling me, hang on a sec, you said this is static, but yet these are supposed to live on an object. You don't have an instance of the object because you said this is static. So the difference between a static and a non-static is the non-static ones can access these variables. Now, coming back to the question about static variables. Static variables are effectively a way of having a global that's associated with a class. It's as simple as that, really. So there is only one, and I had that example in here before. It's counter any instance of, well, I made it public, so anything can access that, but there will only be one, in the entire program, there will only be one integer for counter. And I can see now if I change that, I can see that counter, and I can mutate it if I wanted to. And there are various times you might use a static. Generally, you want to avoid them as a practice thing, but that's really something we'll come on to. We're more talking about, rather than good practices, let's learn the basics of the language first. We'll come on to a bit about good practices. There's also some paradigms, and we can go too deep into that. So I want to get past the basics first. So again, this here, static. Oh, I just got a beep. Am I still there? Am I still live? Something beeped in my ear. Static functions are more like a utility. Am I still live, guys? Can you still hear me? I don't know if I've died. Yes, alright, cool. Alright. So, well, static functions are more like a utility function. Yeah, it could be a utility function. You can code without instantiating it. Absolutely, yeah. I've also thought, if I would use a regular function inside a namespace instead, you can't do that in C#. I think I know what you're saying. Are you saying you can? Are you asking? I think you're asking here. Can I do this? Alive. All right, cool. I think you're asking if you can do this. How can I make it really transparent? You are asking if I can do. Press the wrong bloody key again. Can I do that? Because it's not within a class. In C#, everything has to be part of a class. I think that's what you're asking. I think it's the same in Java. I can't remember. It's a long, long time since I've done Java. But this makes it equivalent. Almost. Now it's equivalent. Now, do you all know what? So, does that make sense between static and private? Does that resonate? And do you need more? Do you need more details on that? And any of you guys following along, or you just, or maybe you don't need to. Actually, I think you're probably all. Well, one of you is vibe coding, the other one is you've already done a lot of this stuff within Unity anyway. So perhaps you guys don't need to follow along. But assuming we've got our head around static and member functions. These are called member functions. Yes, everything should be a class in C#. Every bit of functionality is associated with a class. I'm trying to think if there are any exceptions to that. In terms of functions, let me be specific. In terms of functions that you want to create, everything needs to be a member of a class, and you dictate whether it has a static state or is a member function. If it's a member function, you need to call it an object. If it's a static function, you can call it without one. Yes, private by default. In answer to your question, bloody key, hotkey again. I'm never gonna get out of that habit. Maybe I'll move to Visual Studio because you guys aren't following. You're asking if I can do... I did copy and paste it. Where's it gone? You can already see that it doesn't like that. But if I put that inside a class, let's just verify that the rest of the syntax was right. It's giving me some squiggles, but I don't know if they're errors or just warnings. It's never used. Yeah, that's legal. That's legal syntax. Oh no, it's fine. If I know what languages you've got experience in, I've done all the C's, so I'm pretty good with most of the C's. So if I know where you're coming from, it helps me explain it better. Absolutely. Yeah. So your syntax would have been legal should it been inside a class. So yes, all your functions need to be defined within the class, but you dictate whether it's a static function, which is you one without, there's not a member function, just by using the static. You can also have, is it worth going into? No, I won't go into, I did paste it up there. Look. I won't go into static classes yet. Right, public and private. I think I'm getting it. Boomtrap, you know what that means. So something is private by default if you don't declare it static. Oh, no, you don't know what that means. Hang on. Static and public and private are not related whatsoever, right? There are different things which I'm now going to explain to you. So I'll come back to your big question. But before we get into that, I'm going to explain. Right, let's make that not static. Now that's not static. Oh, sorry, no, I didn't mean to do that. Let's make that private. What private and public control is what else can see those functions or variables, but I've only got public variables at the moment. And that's a bad idea, by the way. I'm deliberately showing a bad idea there because we're going to move on to making those private and read-only later. But I want to keep it simple because I don't want to throw too much in at once. And, you know, I've kind of got in my head a sort of progressive way that we're going to move forward. So, as you see, now that I move this to private, which is also the default. The default is private. So that and that is the same. Now this is telling me I've got a red underline there. It won't like it. That won't compile. And if I squiggle over it, it's got you cannot access private method. Private dictates what can access it. If it's private, only stuff in here can. So for example, I can call it from there. Can't call it from there. And that is nothing to do with whether it's a static function or not. It's to do with its public or private. Yes, absolutely correct. Static doesn't affect access specifier. The access specifier, the reason for this in a modern language, and you can't really do this in C, but in C++, C#, most object-oriented languages, in fact I think all of them, there might be some that I don't know about. JavaScript probably actually doesn't really have this thing. I'm not sure actually. Maybe it does. I'm not up to date with modern JavaScript. But in general, classes will allow you to have public, private, or there's another one called protected, which we'll come on to later. And the reason that you might want to stop something from calling can you see is for maintainability. What you want to do when you're developing classes in object-oriented code is object-oriented languages is develop a public API, the public parts that are just enough to get the job done. Don't make everything public because users of your code base will start using them. If you make them private, you guarantee that nothing else is touching them, which means when you come to refactor or readjust or change its behavior or delete it, whatever, you know that you're not affecting anything else in the code base. So you generally want to provide a public API that gives you enough to do whatever the job is that you're trying to do. Your general stance should be keep everything private, and that's called encapsulation. It's part of what goes towards encapsulation. Static versus global. When to use one of them, since both of them have the same lifetime. Static is global in this context. It's the same thing. Totally analogous. They are in C#. you might have a stat. Let's do it. Shall I make a reference? Shall I get into reference? No, I'm going to stick with the types I've got for now. We'll come on to reference types later. But generally, static means it's built from the start of the project, or at least when the first thing tries to use it. It can be a little bit clever in here. So static exists for the lifetime duration. From that perspective, static versus global are completely analogous. Static equals global. Right, so say hello lives in the same class, and it can still say, yes, absolutely, yeah, 100%. That's spot on the money. So anything in this class can see the private. Anything defined within this class can see the private member functions and private variables, and that is a big win when you've got a complex code base. In a trivial example like this, you're unlikely to make a mistake that you've got a public API and something accidentally calls it and blah, blah, blah. It really makes your life as a software developer a lot easier, because you can easily infer, oh, well, I know it's private, so nothing else can have affected this, so I can adjust how this behaves just by looking in the context of here. Whereas if this can you see is called from 40 different places, I've got to look at every single one of those and make sure that I don't cause any side effects by changing that behavior. So it allows you to develop with relative impunity. It allows you to make, if you make the bits public and only the bits that need to be public, it means that you make your code a lot more resistant, a lot more easy to change and easy to maintain. Order doesn't matter, by the way, in a class. I'm not sure what that's in reference to, unless you mean in reference in C. Maybe it is a general question. In C# you can get away with a lot more than you can in C++. In C++ you need to, well, let me rephrase that. In C++ you would tend to have a header file that dictates your functions, but until either the declaration of that function has been seen, you won't be able to call it. That could be an inline method in C++, or it could be just by a static function that's defined somewhere that doesn't even live in a class. You get a lot more leeway in C#. Don't matter where you define these things. I could put all these variables at the bottom. It's not going to make a difference. Don't care. And similarly, when you refer to other classes, I'm not having to explicitly reference like you would do a hash include, which you would have seen a lot of. I don't need to do that. I just add a reference. But I also need to be a little bit explicit in how I call that. What I could have done here, actually, if I didn't want to, I could do I could do that, and then I effectively don't need to be as explicit. I'm going to keep it like it is for now because it's more demonstrative. But you can effectively do that, and it pulls it. Maybe it can make your code a bit more terse. I mean, you can call the function even if it's declared within the class. Of course, it's the same with variables. Yeah, cool. Okay. All right, so we have public-private. Does that make sense about public-private? Why that is an advantage? Why you want to do that? And obviously, and you understand why now that's broken, right? I don't know how much there is a delay on this call either. I think there's probably a good 10 seconds or something. Right? So I'm speaking before I get a response from Discord. There's a bit of a delay. You just want to make sure you understand, you got it, and helpful. All right, cool. All right, excellent. Right, so I'm going to fix that now. I'm going to fix that. I'm going to do that. So now it's public. The squiggles have gone away. That's all good. I can call it. Right. So, and now coming back to this public and private. Why is it bad that these variables are public? Why is it bad? Well, let me tell you why it's bad. I'm going to have to do, because it's only a contrived example, I'll explain it rather than try and write something. Because we've got a fairly simple code base here, obviously. But anything can change the age. Anything can change the name. Now, for similar reasons about how your functions want to be private, Your variables want to be private. You want to restrict what can access them to what needs to access them. You don't want to make them public unless it's absolutely necessary. In fact, there's a better way of dealing with that kind of situation called properties, which probably might be a good place for me to move to next, actually, because I don't know if you guys have done properties. But let's have a look at why this is bad. Age, for example, might be an integral variable that's used for a calculation, and for whatever reason it now gets changed somewhere in my program because I didn't have this as private, and because that gets changed somewhere in the code base and I've allowed it to happen because it's not not private, that could have really massively affected the behavior. So your general consensus, you want to create these as private. Why does it give me squiggle under there? Does not match to field private. Okay, right. There is a naming convention for private variables. I didn't think Rider would pick up on it. If it's a private, well, what you're supposed to do is put an underscore in it, right? But naming conventions, I'm not too bothered about that for the moment, so I'm going to leave them out. If I was developing this code for a real code, I would adhere to the naming convention, and that is it's basically saying for private variables, put an underscore. Anyway. I tend to use those for member variables. The compiler won't help, won't really hurt, it won't break anything. These are just recommendations. So, I want to create these as private, private variables. In general, you don't want public variables. There are some instances where they are, but in the general case, your de facto rule of thumb standpoint should be to have your variables as private. I'm going to change that one as well. Right. Okay, so now I've broken this. Oh dear, that's a problem. Right, so okay, what can I do to protect that? So I can't access the edge now because I made it private. I can't see an edge. So let's look at it from. Okay, I tell you what. Then I'll go with the readability. I'm seeing what you're saying. The naming convention for readability at a quick glance. Yeah, let me go with them. Oh, this might be useful to you as well. A little IDE tip. I could rename every instance of that manually, or how do I do it in this IDE actually? I can do a rename there. Oh, it's the same hotkey. Oh, interestingly, right, actually before I do that, let's put this back to public, because it's not demonstrating what I wanted to demonstrate very well there. I'll put it back to public so that this behaves properly again. I'm now going to rename that. I'll use the hotkey. In fact, no, what? Because you guys might be following on. I'm going to do rename and put an underscore there. You see, it's changed it in both places, and everywhere it was used, it changed it. Now, when I made it private, it didn't, because it didn't understand that age was referenced there because it wasn't linked. It wasn't correct syntax. But basically, let's do that one too. I'm using the name. I'm not using it anywhere else. But you can see it's changed it up there. Let's do the counter as well. Boom. All right. So yeah, that's the standard naming convention. There, you would put underscores if the variable. Oh, actually, I'm not sure. I should be putting that. What is the standard? Okay, yeah, static ones. That's right. Static ones you don't put the underscore, and it's usually uppercase, I think, for static. I'm going to change them all manually this time. Again, these are just guidelines, really. Let's fix that one. Oops. And I wasn't sure what rules Rider's going to impose them. Well, what suggestions he's going to make. But what I was taught was if it's a member variable, use underscore generally. Now, properties I'm going to come on to shortly. But use an underscore. Again, doesn't really matter that much if you're learning. But anyway, there it is. Right. So let's consider let's consider properties now, and let's consider tidying this up because I don't want anything to arbitrarily be able to change the age. So what do we do about this? So, well, first of all, let's make it private, and then we'll address what the problems are that imposes. All of these are private, which basically means nothing can mess with the internals of this class that we don't want to, because the only things in this class can modify this. Now, if you're coming from C++, there is a slight variation on that because you can use friend classes, but we won't go into those here in any detail. So now what I've got is these variables are private, but it's broken this because this is outside of the class.